71% of Americans who were planning to buy a home in 2025 never did. They genuinely wanted to buy. They went out and tried, and the numbers just wouldn't cooperate. When you step back and look at the full picture, it's pretty obvious why. About 40 million adults say they're planning to purchase a home in the coming year. What was the actual number of homes that sold in 2025, existing and new combined? Roughly 4.7 million. So there literally aren't enough houses for even a small fraction of the people chasing them. And the ones that do exist are priced past what most families can realistically afford. The market is brutal right now. Buyers are also relying on advice. Those classic rules of thumb that are supposed to guide you through buying a home. Because those rules were designed for an economy that honestly doesn't exist anymore. Hannah Jones, a senior economist at Realtor.com, breaks it down pretty clearly. 3 forces are slamming into buyers all at once. Mortgage rates are high, home price appreciation is slowing down, and the actual carrying costs of owning a place, your insurance, your taxes, your maintenance, those are climbing fast. Any one of those on its own would be painful enough. But all 3 happening together, they completely shatter the old playbook. And by the way, 34% of people who already own homes consider themselves house poor. That number helps explain why the old playbook fails after the purchase too. So let's talk about the playbook itself. The first rule almost every buyer has heard at some point is, stay in your home for at least 5 years and you'll break even. It sounds reasonable, and it's been repeated so many times, it basically feels like a law of nature. But it's really just a rule of thumb, and there's a hidden assumption baked right into it. That your home is going to appreciate at roughly 5% a year. For a long time, that was pretty close to reality. During the pandemic boom, national appreciation hit 17%. Then it cooled off to about 2%. And now, home prices are growing at only about 0.8% year over year. So what happens to break even at 0.8% appreciation? According to Realtor.com's modeling, which measures how long it takes to recoup your transaction and carrying costs through appreciation and principal paydown, it doesn't show up in year 5. It shows up around year 30. You'd basically have to live in the house for the entire length of a full mortgage just to get back to zero. Now, that's the national picture under one model, and it reflects an unusually slow growth rate that would be unprecedented if sustained for decades. But it shows how fast the old rules fall apart when appreciation drops. And when you start breaking it down by region, the differences are massive. In the Northeast, break-even comes around year 7. The Midwest, around year 9. The South is slower than that. And the West, where appreciation is running at roughly negative 2.5% year over year, might not break even within a standard ownership window at all. Now, there's a different way to run the math, and this is important because different models answer different questions. Zillow's buy versus rent model doesn't just look at whether you recoup your costs through appreciation. It compares the total financial position of a buyer against a renter who invests the cash they didn't put into a house. Under that model, national break-even comes in around 6 years with either 5 or 20% down. So these two numbers, year 30 from Realtor.com and year 6 from Zillow, aren't contradicting each other. They're measuring different things. Realtor.com is stress testing the old 5-year rule under very slow appreciation. Zillow is running a broader buy versus rent balance sheet. Both are useful, but they should not be read as the same break-even calculation. And when you zoom into individual metro areas using Zillow's model, the range gets even wilder. The fastest break-even markets aren't the flashy coastal cities you'd probably guess. They're places like Columbus, Ohio, where a buyer breaks even in about 3.5 years with 5% down. Memphis comes in around 3.7. Then you've got Buffalo, Indianapolis, Cincinnati. These are the markets where the math actually works fast. But then there's the other end of the spectrum, and it's pretty shocking. Zillow's modeling identifies markets where buying never beats renting within a 30-year window. In San Francisco, a buyer ends up about $583,000 behind a renter. In San Jose, that gap stretches to $1.89 million. And the one that catches most people completely off guard is New Orleans, where the gap reaches $3.39 million. Now, that doesn't mean owning in those places is automatically a mistake. But it does mean that at today's prices, the financial argument for buying is weak compared to renting and investing the difference. The 5-year rule doesn't just get stretched in these markets, it falls apart entirely. So if the timeline to get your money back can range from 3 years all the way to never, then the amount of money you put in up front matters more than it ever has. And that brings us to the second rule most buyers have drilled into their heads. Save 20% for a down payment. This actually surprised me. Only 37% of Americans know that a 20% down payment isn't actually required. Conventional loans go as low as 3% down. VA and USDA loans can require 0. And the median first-time buyer right now puts down about 10%. 20% isn't a requirement at all. It's a myth, and roughly 2/3 of the country still believes it. But even at 10%, let's actually run the numbers. At a recent median home sale price of about $410,800, 10% down comes out to about $41,080. Just think about that for a second. That's what only 10% looks like when you convert it to actual money. And if you tried to save the full 20%, Hannah Jones actually modeled this out. At today's median home prices, combined with a typical savings rate, getting to 20% would take approximately 37.5 years. In 1990, that same calculation took about 3 years. So to have 20% ready for a home at today's median price, you would have had to start saving around 2002. That timeline turns a down payment into a project that spans an entire generation. So the 20% rule is basically dead as a universal target. But there's a nuance that matters a lot. How much you actually put down still makes a real difference, and the right answer depends entirely on where you're buying. Zillow's data shows that in Columbus, putting 5% down actually breaks even faster than putting 20% down, about 3.5 years compared to 4.1. But in Chicago, it's the opposite. 20% down is both faster to break even and build stronger long-term wealth. The reason comes down to different rent-to-price ratios and appreciation paths in different markets. The exact same decision, 5% versus 20%, produces completely opposite outcomes depending on your city. There really is no single right answer. So the 20% rule is dead, and dropping your target so you can buy sooner creates its own cost, one that's bigger than most people realize. If you delay buying, it costs you. Realtor.com's research shows that someone who buys their first home by age 30 ends up with about $119,000 more in net worth by age 50 compared to someone who waits until 40. That's a 22.5% advantage, and it essentially vanishes if you wait past 43. The median first-time buyer right now is already 40 years old. They're standing right at the edge of the window where delay stops being a trade-off and starts turning into a permanent loss. But the workarounds people use to avoid that delay, those cost money too. 22% of prospective buyers say they plan to pull from retirement accounts to fund a down payment. So let's say you take $10,000 out of a retirement account. At 7% annual returns, over 30 years that $10,000 would have grown to roughly $81,000. The benefit you can see is $10,000 toward a house. The cost you can't see is over $70,000 in retirement wealth that will just never exist. And honestly, neither path, waiting nor rushing, gives you a clean answer. That creates a genuine trap with no good exit. Now, buyers who actually manage to get in, especially with thin reserves, run into yet another piece of conventional wisdom that's supposed to protect them. Set aside 1% of your home's value each year for maintenance. And that rule is broken too. On a $425,000 home, 1% means $4,250 a year. Sounds manageable, right? But repair costs jumped 16.7% between 2022 and 2024. Plumbing specifically is up 32%. Structural work, 21%. Electrical, 19%. The 1% rule was built for a world where repair costs roughly tracked general inflation. And they just don't anymore. On top of that, the rule completely ignores how old the house is. A pre-1940 home costs roughly $6,700 a year to maintain, while a post-2010 home runs about $4,500. That's nearly a 50% premium for an older home, and the 1% rule doesn't distinguish between them at all. So it fails on two separate fronts, inflation and property variation, at the same time. Another surprise is that even a fixed-rate mortgage payment can actually change, and most people have no idea. Only 44% of Americans are aware that their monthly payment can go up even with a fixed rate. The way it works is through escrow, the portion of your payment that covers property taxes and homeowners insurance. When those costs rise, your lender adjusts the escrow amount and your payment goes up with it. 34% of homeowners saw their insurance costs increase. 12% got hit with escrow shortages, basically a bill they never saw coming. The same 34% shows how common the pressure is. Homeowners consider themselves house poor. 62% say owning a home has been much more expensive than they thought it would be. As NerdWallet's Kate Wood puts it, affordability challenges homebuyers and homeowners alike. Because the cost to buy a home and the cost to actually own one are two very different things. And the 5-year rule, the 20% rule, and the 1% rule were all trying to answer questions about what it costs to own, using assumptions that just don't hold up anymore. So what does a homebuyer actually do with all of this? Well, first, some reassurance, because it's not all bad. Buying isn't dead. Zillow's 30-year modeling shows that a buyer who puts 20% down ends up with roughly $735,000 in net housing wealth. A renter who invested the equivalent cash ends up at approximately negative $1.15 million. That's a gap of about $1.89 million. And even after you account for the renter's investment returns, about $313,000, the buyer still comes out dramatically ahead. The reason is a dual benefit that only owners get. Your home appreciates over time, and you're insulated from future rent increases. Renters stay exposed to every lease reset, every annual bump, and over decades that exposure compounds into something enormous. So buying still works, but how you buy matters enormously. Evan Mills, an associate financial advisor at Scholar Advising, frames it really well. Focus on actually affording the house rather than stretching for the biggest and most expensive one a lender will allow. What a lender approves you for and what your household can realistically absorb month after month, year after year, with insurance going up, escrow adjustments landing, and a roof that's eventually going to need replacing, those are completely different numbers. And frankly, the market is already moving in this direction, whether the old advice catches up or not. The median down payment across all buyers is 12.8%, already well below 20%. People are adapting in practice, even while the old rules keep echoing in theory. Benjamin Sheekin, CEO of Fincast, a mortgage platform, puts the big picture principle pretty clearly. The new rule of thumb should be to work smarter, not harder. Personalization should be the real rule of thumb. Your market, your property, your actual financial situation, stress tested against real carrying costs, not national averages from a decade ago. The old rules were built for a simpler market. The new approach is harder because it asks you to actually do the work yourself. But it's the one that really protects you. The playbook now has to become your own.